It was a quiet, peaceful evening when I first stepped into my new home. The kind of house you dream of, nothing too grand, just a modest space that felt like it could be my little sanctuary. But then, something strange happened. Something I couldn't ignore. Think you know how this story ends? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. I had been moving boxes all day, unpacking my life into this new place, feeling the excitement of starting fresh. But there was one corner of the house that kept pulling my attention. The basement. It wasn't that the basement was special. In fact, it seemed pretty ordinary. But there was something about it that felt off. I remember walking down the hallway that led to the basement door. The door was old, weathered, like it had been untouched for years. The wood was scratched, and there was this heavy, old-fashioned lock on it. A lock that seemed to dare you to try and open it. Curiosity got the best of me, of course. I had to know what was behind it. But just as I reached for the handle, I noticed something strange. A note, yellowing, folded neatly, but hastily written. Do not open this door. It wasn't just the warning that sent a chill down my spine. It was the way the note was written. The words were a little too desperate, too urgent, as if the person who wrote it had been in a hurry. And then, it hit me, this wasn't just some warning. It felt like a command. Like someone didn't just want me to stay away from the door. They were terrified of what would happen if I didn't. At that moment, I couldn't help but feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: fear. I wasn't the kind of person who would usually fall for superstitions or let fear control me. But there was something unsettling about this situation. Maybe it was the tone of the note. Maybe it was the eerie silence of the house. Or maybe it was just my overactive imagination running wild. But no matter how hard I tried to push it out of my head, the warning stayed with me. As days passed, I found myself walking past the door more and more. Every time I would stop, stare at the lock, wonder. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a door after all. Nothing to be afraid of. But one night something changed. I had just finished dinner and was about to go to bed when I heard a faint sound. A sound coming from the basement. It wasn't like any sound I'd heard before. It wasn't the typical creaks of an old house settling or the sounds of pipes shifting. No, this was different. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping. Almost like fingers were drumming on the other side of that door. Tap, then a pause. Tap, then a pause. I stood still, frozen in place. My heart started to race. I told myself it was just the house settling, maybe the wind or the pipes acting up. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew what I was hearing wasn't normal. The tapping continued. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost too quiet, like it was meant to be heard just enough to make you question if you really heard it. I thought about the note again. The warning. The tapping grew louder, a bit more urgent. It was coming from the other side of that locked door. And that's when it hit me. What if the warning wasn't meant for me? What if the door was locked for a reason, not to keep me out, but to keep whatever was behind it in? I backed away slowly, my eyes still fixed on the door. My mind was racing. There was no way I could just let this go. I had to know what was behind it. But something inside me, the small, reasonable part of my mind, told me I needed to stop. The tapping had stopped now, but my pulse was still pounding in my ears. I walked away, but not without a glance over my shoulder. Something was happening in that house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was behind that door was watching me. And so, I found myself stuck between two choices. I could ignore it, pretend it was nothing and move on with my life. Or, I could face whatever was hiding behind that door, even though it felt like I was being pulled into something much darker. I couldn't help but wonder, what was behind that door, and why had no one else mentioned it? The next few days felt off. The house, which had once seemed peaceful, now felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I tried to go about my usual routine. I spent my days unpacking the rest of my things, setting up the living room, organizing the kitchen, but my mind kept drifting back to that door. Every time I passed the basement, my eyes would naturally flick to the locked door. That strange feeling in my chest grew with each passing moment. I told myself it was just my nerves, nothing more. I had to get used to being in this house, and I certainly didn't want to let a door ruin the experience. But there was a problem. Every night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I'd hear it again, the tapping. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the house settling, or maybe even the pipes. But the sounds were too deliberate, too rhythmic. Each tap seemed to be calling me, and each night, it felt like I was getting closer to the truth. Even though I couldn't bring myself to open that door, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out what was happening. One evening, after a long day of work, I decided to go down to the basement again. The house was dark, the air cold and damp. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing against me. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, looking down at the basement door. That's when I heard it, the tap. It was faint at first, but it was unmistakable. I stood there for a long moment, trying to convince myself to go back upstairs, to forget about the door. But the tapping continued, like it was trying to get my attention. I knew in that moment that I couldn't back out now. Something was calling me. I walked down the steps slowly, the wooden floor creaking under my feet. The basement seemed to stretch out endlessly before me. The shadows at the corners of the room seemed deeper than usual, and the air felt thick, almost heavy. When I reached the door, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stood there, hand hovering just above the cold metal of the lock. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the overwhelming curiosity. Maybe it was the strange need to face whatever it was that had been tapping, knocking, calling. With a shaky breath, I turned the key. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed far too loudly in the silence of the basement. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands clammy. I pushed the door slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. What I saw inside didn't make sense. The room beyond was small, just an empty space with cracked stone walls. But there was something else. At the far corner of the room, I saw it. A box, a large, wooden chest, covered in dust and cobwebs, just sitting there. And as I stared at the chest, something about it felt wrong. Felt like it didn't belong there, like it had been placed with intent. A strange feeling washed over me. This wasn't just any ordinary chest. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. Before I could step inside, I heard the sound again, the tapping. But this time, it wasn't coming from the other side of the room. No, it was coming from the chest. My body froze. The tapping was louder now, faster, as if something or someone was trapped inside. I couldn't move. The fear wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I wanted to run. I wanted to slam the door shut and pretend none of this was happening. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my heart racing, my breath shallow. The tapping continued, now accompanied by a low, muffled sound, like something or someone was trying to get out. I took a step closer, against every instinct telling me to turn back. What could possibly be inside that chest? Why had it been hidden down here? And most importantly, what had the previous owners been trying to keep locked away? The tapping grew louder, more urgent. It sounded like something was moving inside the box, something trying to break free. I didn't know what was happening, but a part of me felt like I already knew. My feet were still rooted to the ground, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The air in the basement seemed heavier, thicker, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me with every passing second. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to leave. It wasn't just the sound. It was the feeling. The feeling that I was on the edge of something. Something that had been hidden away, forgotten, or worse, protected. I took another step toward the chest, my hand shaking as I reached out to touch it. The wood felt rough under my fingers, cold and damp, like it had been there for years. A layer of dust clung to its surface, but the strange thing was that it didn't feel as old as it should have. The rest of the basement had a certain mustiness, a sense of abandonment. But this chest felt different, felt like it had been disturbed recently. The tapping stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was still, too still. It was almost as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. But then, the air shifted. It grew colder, and that's when I heard it. A low, raspy voice. "Don't open it." The words were barely a whisper, but they cut through the silence like a knife. My head snapped toward the basement stairs. No one was there. My eyes darted back to the chest. Was I hearing things? I stepped back, my heart racing even faster now. The warning echoed in my mind, playing over and over again. Don't open it, but there was something else, too. A pull, a desire to know, to understand. The curiosity gnawed at me, making it harder to turn away. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something terrible, something I couldn't control. But there was no turning back now, was there? I reached for the chest again, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with the latch. It didn't open easily. For a moment, I thought about just leaving it, going back upstairs, locking the basement door, and pretending like nothing had happened. But the voice kept repeating, "Don't open it," and the curiosity kept growing, stronger than the fear. Finally, the latch clicked open. I pulled the top of the chest back slowly, my hands shaking. It creaked as it opened, the sound filling the basement. The cold air rushed out from inside the box, as if something was escaping. And then there it was, a book. It was old, its leather cover cracked and worn with age. It looked like it had been sitting in that box for decades, maybe longer. The pages were yellowed, the ink fading, but what struck me the most was the symbol on the cover. It was a strange, circular shape, almost like a seal, with intricate lines and markings that didn't make sense. It looked unnatural, like it was drawn by someone who didn't belong to this world. I felt my stomach turn. Something about that symbol made me uneasy, but I couldn't look away. The book called to me, pulling me closer, and I reached out, my fingers brushing the cover. As soon as I touched it, a sharp, jarring pain shot through my hand, and I yanked it back in surprise. The pain was gone almost instantly, but my hand felt different, numb, almost like it didn't belong to me anymore. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand what had just happened. My heart was still racing, but I felt this strange sense of dread settling in. Something was wrong, but before I could process it, the temperature in the basement dropped even further. A gust of cold air rushed through the room, and the lights flickered. That's when I heard it again, the voice. But this time it was stronger, louder. "Leave it alone," the voice said, its tone almost angry now, as if it was warning me, threatening me. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but no one was there. The basement was empty, the shadows stretching across the walls like dark fingers. I turned back to the book. I don't know why I felt compelled to open it. Maybe it was the voice, the way it sounded desperate, like it was trying to keep me from something important. Maybe it was the book itself, calling out to me in a way I couldn't explain. But whatever it was, I couldn't stop myself. I flipped open the cover, the pages creaking as they moved. The words on the first page were in a language I didn't recognize. The letters twisted and curled like they were alive, moving in ways that didn't make sense. My head started to ache, the pain growing sharper the longer I stared at the pages. I tried to look away, but the words seemed to pull me in, as if they were seeping into my mind, filling it with thoughts I didn't want. That's when I saw it at the bottom of the page. A warning: do not read beyond this point. The ink was dark, almost like it had been written in blood. I didn't know what to do. Should I close the book and walk away, or should I keep going? The warning was clear, but I couldn't help myself. Something in my gut told me that this was just the beginning. Whatever this book was, whatever was inside that chest, it wasn't something that would let me walk away so easily. And then, as if in response to my thoughts, the lights went out completely. The basement was plunged into darkness. A shiver ran down my spine as I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, trying to use its light to see. But before I could turn it on, I heard it. A low, growling noise. It was coming from the book. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. The growl echoed through the darkness, deeper now, like it was coming from something much larger than I had ever imagined. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow as I fumbled with my phone. The faint glow from the screen barely pierced the thick blackness that surrounded me. I turned it on, the light flickering as I aimed it towards the chest. The shadows seemed to shift, twisting and writhing like they had a life of their own. Every corner of the basement felt alive, closing in, pressing on me. And the book wasn't just lying there. It was moving. I could see it now with the faint light of my phone, its pages turning slowly, by themselves, as if some invisible force was flipping through the pages one by one. A chill ran down my spine as I backed away, my legs shaking. This was no longer just a book. It was something much more. Something I had unleashed by simply opening it. The growling sound grew louder, closer. The noise was coming from inside the book, but it wasn't the pages. No, it was something beneath them, something trapped, struggling to get out. I could hear it clawing, scratching, desperate to escape. Get away from it! The voice, the one I had heard earlier, spoke again. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was sharp, almost frantic. But where was it coming from? The voice wasn't in my head. Not this time. It was somewhere in the room, near me. I swung the phone around, scanning the room, my heart racing as I searched for any sign of movement. The basement was still unnaturally so. Then, I caught it, the flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow, not from the walls, but from something that was standing right behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing there, just the old pipes running along the ceiling, the dust hanging in the air. But the sense of being watched, the feeling that something was there, just out of sight, was overwhelming. The growl had stopped, but the silence was far worse. The air in the basement was thick with tension, and I could feel it closing in around me, like something was waiting for the right moment. I turned back to the book. The pages had stopped moving, but the cover, it was now cracked open a little wider, as if something was trying to push its way out. I knew I should leave. I knew I should walk away, turn off the light, and lock the door. But that same strange pull, that same curiosity, kept me rooted to the spot. I didn't want to know what was in the book, but at the same time I was terrified of not knowing. Whatever it was, it had been hidden for a reason, kept away from the world for so long. And now I had unlocked it. I reached out again, my fingers trembling as I touched the book. The moment my hand made contact, the growl returned. Louder this time, more forceful, came from inside the book. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt like a presence, something alive, something dark. A cold wind swept through the room, knocking my phone from my hand. It clattered across the floor, but I didn't have time to reach for it. The room was shaking, the ground beneath my feet vibrating as if the house itself was alive and angry. Then the book opened wide, the pages snapping back as though they had been waiting for this moment. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. I watched as the pages turned by themselves, the writing changing, shifting, like it was being rewritten in front of my eyes. The words, dark and twisted, began to form shapes, symbols I couldn't understand. And then, in the middle of the pages, something appeared. A face. At first, it was just a shape, but as I stared, the image became clearer. It wasn't a face like anything I had ever seen. It was wrong. The features were distorted, the eyes too large, the mouth too wide. It was like the thing inside the book had been trapped for so long that it had twisted into something monstrous. I stumbled back, my hands reaching out for anything to steady myself. But as I moved, the shadows around the room shifted, closing in tighter. The basement seemed to get smaller, the walls leaning in, pushing me toward the book. No, 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 no. I tried to scream, but the words caught in my throat. The face in the book stared at me, its eyes piercing through the darkness. And then, with one final push, the thing inside the book did the unthinkable. It reached out. A hand, no, a claw, shot out from the pages, grabbing me by the wrist. The moment it touched me, a jolt of ice-cold shot through my body. I screamed, trying to pull away, but the grip was unyielding. The thing in the book was real, and it was not going to let me go. I could feel it pulling me closer, its claws digging into my skin, dragging me toward the open pages. I tried to fight, tried to scream again, but the words wouldn't come. The room seemed to spin, the shadows growing darker, stretching toward me like hungry fingers. In that moment, I realized the truth. Whatever was inside that book, whatever had been hidden for so long, it wasn't just a curse. It was a gateway, a doorway to something far worse than I could ever imagine. And now it was opening. The claw didn't let go. It tightened its grip, pulling me toward the pages of the cursed book. My vision blurred, my body trembling, the freezing cold spreading through me like poison. Every instinct screamed at me to fight back, to get away, but it was useless. My fingers clawed at the air, reaching for anything, but there was nothing to grab. I could feel the book's power surging through me, the weight of whatever lay hidden inside it pressing down on my chest. The room was spinning, the shadows closing in tighter with every second. I was losing myself, becoming part of the darkness that seemed to have been waiting for me all along. Suddenly, the shadows all seemed to snap back, like the force of a giant hand had swept them away. For a moment, everything was still, like the world was holding its breath. My body was frozen in place, my mind fighting to stay conscious, but I couldn't think clearly anymore. The face in the book was still there, staring at me with eyes that burned with hatred. It smiled now, twisted and cruel, as if enjoying my struggle. Couldn't breathe. The pressure was too much. It felt like something was crawling inside my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. But then the voice came again, the same one that had warned me. Don't let it take you. It was weak this time, fading, but it was enough to snap me back to reality. The grip around my wrist loosened just slightly. With everything I had left, I pulled my arm back, yanking myself away from the book's grasp. My body screamed in protest, the cold still seeping through me, but I didn't stop. I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall, gasping for air. I dared not look back at the book. The thing inside it had almost won, but I wasn't going to give in that easily. The air was thick with tension, the silence deafening. The basement seemed to breathe, shifting with an unnatural pulse. I could feel the presence of the thing still in the room, watching me, waiting, but I had broken the connection. I had broken the pull. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking, and for the first time since all of this started, I dared to look at the book again. It was closed now. No more movement, no more shadows, no more growls. But I knew that wasn't the end. The thing inside the book wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the next person to come along, to open the pages and invite it out again. It would never truly be gone, not unless the book was destroyed. And even then, who knew if that would be enough? I backed away slowly, feeling the weight of the knowledge pressing down on me. The warnings, the strange voice I'd heard. Everything had been true. The house hadn't just come with a locked door. It had come with a curse. And now I had to live with that knowledge. But as I turned to leave, I stopped. The door, the locked door, the one that had been there from the start. A shiver ran through me. I had never tried to open it, never dared to. But now the temptation was stronger than ever. What if there was something else hidden behind that door? Something worse? Something that the book had warned me about? I stepped closer, my hand trembling as I reached for the key. For the first time, I wondered if I was truly free from the darkness that had almost consumed me, or had it only just begun. I opened the door, and the world went dark. Ready for more chills and mysteries? Subscribe and turn on the bell. You never know what story is coming next.